Welcome to Marketing Mistakes and How to Avoid Them. Here's your host, Stacey Jones.
Welcome to Marketing Mistakes and How to Avoid Them. I'm Stacey Jones, and I'm so happy to be here with you all today. And I want to give a very warm welcome to Bruce Nash. Bruce is the founder and president of Nash Information Services, the premier provider of movie industry data and research services. The company operates The Numbers, a website that provides box office and video sales tracking and daily industry news. Their insights include competitor analysis and international sales projections for feature films and real-time tracking of the industry through its Opus Data service. In the last 24 years, the company has grown to serve over 1,000 clients, from the major studios and multi-billion-dollar production companies to first-time independent filmmakers. Bruce provides regular commentary and analysis for media outlets, including the LA Times, the New York Times, Variety, the Wall Street Journal, 60 Minutes, and CBS News. His work was featured in the New York Times bestselling book, Big Data, A Revolution That Will Transform How We Live, Work, and Think. Bruce is also the official adjudicator of movie records for the Guinness Book of Records. Today, Bruce and I are going to be chatting about how many impressions entertainment content receives and the metrics inside of the business of entertainment, which quite frankly, personally fascinates me based on the product placement partnerships we build at Hollywood Branded. Bruce, welcome. So happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Stacey. It's great to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So what I'd love to start off with is the man behind the numbers, literally. How did you get into this? What made you gravitate towards movie metrics?
That's a great question. So my background is actually in mathematics. So I have a math degree, and I was working in software development back in the late 90s for IBM, actually, which was very much trying not to do anything about the World Wide Web and the internet, and more or less trying to ignore the whole thing in the hope that it just kind of went away. And I was living in Silicon Valley, and obviously everybody I was, hanging out with was building websites and, getting involved in the web. And I thought, well, I really should learn something about this. And it really came from that, and the fact that I love movies, the fact that there were really, at the time, there was IMDb, but there really wasn't a website devoted to the financial side of the movie industry. It seemed like a good way to just find out how websites were built. And so I created the Numbers website and started running that kind of as a hobby. And then after not very long, I started getting emails from film producers saying, hey, I'm working on my business plan. This data is great, but I need, more than this, right? It's not good enough to just know what was the weekend box office for these films. We need to know how many DVDs are they selling at the time? How much is being rented from Blockbuster? How is this being licensed for television, and so on? And so that really became very quickly the core of the business, was in helping, first of all, independent filmmakers, and then more and more the studios, and now, streamers and, the other big guys in trying to answer those questions. How is this piece of content now? We used to think of movies, now we think of content in, a dozen different ways. How is that going to reach an audience? Who's going to watch it? Why are they going to watch it? And what ultimately, and really, our core strength is in answering the question, how much is this going to make for investors? Is this going to be a good investment? We've really kind of built off of that base of just being interested in tracking stuff, and out of that real idea that we want to be able to track every cent that is spent on a movie as it goes from production through release and into, syndication on TV and all of those things.
Well, without giving away your secret sauce and your magic to how you get there, how do you come up with all these amazing numbers? I mean, it's not like just the average Joe who's out there is like, yes, this is, how many impressions, this is the box office, this is the eyeballs, this is the sales. Like, how do you even figure out how to approach this when you're like, I'm a mathematician and I'm just going to figure it out?
Well, so some of the things we get now from the studio. So the studios send us out their weekend box office numbers and daily numbers and international box office. And some of the demographic information, that we then will, talk about it on the website, but we're also kind of collecting and, trying to keep track of, what films are appealing to what different demographics. But then beyond that, really what we do is we try to gather as much information as we can. So Netflix, for example, has a daily top 10. They actually just announced today that they're going to start doing a little bit more than that, which is exciting for us. And we look for that. We look at, Google Play's chart and iTunes chart and Vudu and Fandango Now and Redbox and try to bring in all of that data to see what's being released where. Are they doing well there? If it's the number one ranked title on Redbox, we can be sure it's, renting pretty well on physical disc. And then fortunately now we're well enough established that we get real numbers from our clients. So they will share with us, this is how many DVDs we sold. This is what we got for the streaming rights for this title. And that allows us, by marrying, that public data with the private information that we have, to be able to say, well, this is, based on the type of movie this is, and what we're seeing our clients get from, Netflix for shows. We can say with reasonable certainty, this is what this show would have got, or what this project should be worth when it's made.
And so your go-to people who are interested in your service typically are looking for funding for their film, their project, or ability to talk to their financiers to explain and justify what the ask is, right?
Yeah, in terms of absolute numbers, exactly, yes. Those are the most, at any given time, we're probably working on, 10 different projects like that with our clients. Mm-hmm. We also work with the larger, the studios and the streamers, and that tends to be more on a data basis, so, if you're a streamer, you're spending now billions of dollars on producing content, and, you can afford to just buy every piece of data that we generate. And so we have, deals with streamers, with the studios, where they're acquiring our data, and then it goes in, unfortunately for me and everyone, it kind of goes into a black hole, right? Because they're not telling me what they're doing with it, beyond being grateful for having it, I suppose. But I'd love to be in the room a little bit more with some of the decisions that they're making, based on all that data. But
I'm sure a lot of it's used for competitor analysis. Like, I'm sure Amazon and Netflix and HBO Max are very curious about how each other's content's performing, and everyone is so tight-lipped about it that they're just looking for little breadcrumbs anywhere on the trail to be able to piece together what their business case is as well.
Right. Yes. And even, to the point of, just what are the other platforms showing? There is so much content out there, and anybody, listening who has a Netflix subscription knows you just can't keep up with what Netflix is putting out every day. So, if you're HBO Max, your interest is probably, well, what broadly speaking is Netflix doing right now? Mm-hmm. As they bring out reality shows and sort of docu-series, and Red Notice came out at the weekend, which is a sort of traditional big budget blockbuster.
200 million to produce, they said.
Right. Yeah. They're spending that kind of money.
That's big blockbuster for our listeners. That is big movie money. That's the approach of what the major studios are doing for blockbusters are going to go global, that are their tentpole summer hits. This is the big thing that they just did. Right.
And then you have to sort of multiply that across the world, right? Because Netflix are operating in every country in the world, essentially, and they're licensing content in every country, including, if you're in the UK and watching Netflix, it's British television is, very popular there. And also, US TV shows that Netflix can't license in the United States, but they've got a deal to show in the UK. So,
and they're paying
that
for that
whole
money.
landscape.
They're like having to pay if they don't produce it themselves.
Right. And that whole landscape is very complicated. And so, being able to just cut through that and see, okay, Netflix, drama is really popular in France for Netflix, and, Disney, Disney, to take a specific example, Disney Plus is, very driven by its sports coverage in India. They've got through Hotstar rights to, I believe, the cricket in India, which is a huge deal in that country.
Just
and that
not
drives,
here in the United States. No one wants
Right.
cricket here.
Right. One of us on the podcast wants cricket, but I do see that I'm in a very, very small minority.
So you prefer cricket over rugby?
I do actually.
And
yeah,
you
yeah.
prefer cricket over football, and actually like the soccer football?
I do. I'm a little long in the tooth for it, but I still go out every weekend and play cricket, and I'm a huge fan of it. And so I know intimately how difficult it is to find on the television here in the United States compared to the rest of the world. But that's driving the business for Disney Plus in India is that they have those rights, and here in the US we don't really think about that at all because it's not part of what people are looking at every day. So
yeah, if we're not in mainstream sports, dramas, horror, and comedy, there's pretty much not much being watched.
Right.
So how, when you're looking at this data, and obviously your sources are very good that you're pulling together, but what kind of pictures can it paint? Like, what is the story that data typically tells that you've put together? It's more than just numbers.
Yeah. So what we're really trying to do is, and you actually put it beautifully, is to get the data to tell us a story that we can communicate with people. Because ultimately, the best data in the world isn't going to be worth anything if you can't persuade somebody to make a business decision based on it. And so, we look at, and a good example of this right now is the box office in the US, which obviously we're coming back from the pandemic and films are starting to come out again. And we're beginning to learn what films are working, what aren't, as people return to theaters. And, because we've spent a lot of time thinking about this and we have a classification system for movies, for every movie that goes into a theater, we know how to think about that movie and how to draw conclusions about what's happening in the theatrical business. Mm-hmm. So, for example, back in the very early part of the year, around March time, all of the restaurants were closed, all of the parks were closed. You couldn't take your kids really anywhere out of doors, apart from movie theaters in some cases. And so at the beginning of the recovery, Tom and Jerry was the first really successful movie because, we believe parents were just desperate to get out of the house and do something with their kids. And this provided them with the means to do that. So we can start to say, okay, well, now we know that this is, the kind of the core of the business. And then through the summer, we sort of evolved a bit more, and action movies really have taken off. And, Black Widow and Shang-Chi and Venom did very well. And now we're getting to the point where we're into Oscar season and we're seeing films like Spencer and The French Dispatch and whatever it was came out at the weekend. I'm blanking on right now. But those films, seem to be doing less well because they're aimed at an audience that is
at
less.
Home. They're staying home. They're worried about vaccines and they're at home.
Exactly. Yeah. So what we're able to do now is we've now got a pretty good picture of what's happening in the theatrical market, and we can go, with our clients and say, well, these are the films that we think are going to do well in 2022. These are the ones that, maybe a little bit more of an issue. And so that, as they say, I mean, we can, because we're thinking about the data, the goal is to be able to translate that into a story where somebody can say, okay, this needs to be our strategy around family movies, around action movies, around the Oscar hopefuls.
Or maybe we put a pause on something for a little bit until COVID works its way out.
Right. Unfortunately, I'm not taking responsibility for any for any of that. But yeah, I mean, Top Gun will come out eventually, but
and Mission Impossible too.
Right.
The ever-ending moving window of a Tom Cruise fleet of films that keeps on pushing things back through the years.
Right. I mean, and you can see why with someone like, with movies like that, they've invested so much in, and they're both Paramount movies, so Paramount doesn't really have a big streaming presence yet.
You don't think Paramount Plus is the big streaming presence that they're hoping for it to be right now?
Not yet. But they could say, well, come next summer, this is our opportunity to do a simultaneous release or do something with Paramount Plus that will get actually people to sign up in large numbers. Like
Disney did with Black Widow.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or Jungle Cruise, where they did it a little bit better and didn't get sued by Scarlett Johansson.
Right. So yeah, we'll see. But I think that there's, now we're beginning to get a picture of what the theatrical market looks like, what can be released and what the business model looks like. And then, the studios can make the decisions on what to do with an individual film based on that.
What do you think of what's going on with the streamers in general? We made a little joke about Paramount Plus, and I will tell you right now that it has some series. Their comedies are phenomenal. They have really, really good shows that should last the time, should get picked up, should go out for licensing all over the place, and I hope they do. But what is your viewpoint on what's going on in the streaming landscape? So,
I do a class at a film school, and obviously this is something that the students are extremely interested in, and I always start out with a slide where we go down the streaming platforms and talk about what is the business goal for this company that runs this platform, and it's actually different for every single platform. In the case of Netflix, their goal is to get you to subscribe again next month. They want your credit card to be charged successfully in 30 days time. And that's their business model. If you're Disney, your business model is getting people into theme parks, because that's where Disney really makes its money. And so they want to build these, big brands that can become, essentially theme park attractions. Star Wars and Marvel and Pixar and so on. If you're Warner Brothers, it's a little bit more of a difficult question to sort of figure out what their business goal is, and
not to be left behind.
Right.
I think that's what their scramble is. It's not the best business goal, but I think that might be what they're trying to do.
Right. Yeah, to sort of compete on all fronts. And merging with Discovery is actually kind of interesting from that perspective, that sort of gets them much more towards competing with Netflix, I think, than it is towards competing with Disney.
Because of all the content that they get in the licensing deal from that, especially with reality content that Discovery is known for, and the reality drives a lot of viewers on a continual basis.
Right. Yes. And you can't really imagine Disney wanting to do much reality, because it just doesn't fit with their brand. It doesn't fit with, their business model, frankly.
No, because reality usually is a little more salacious sometimes. But Disney, I will say, does very good elephant documentaries. I like that.
Right. Yes. National Geographic stuff is, a good fit for Disney and the whole family basis, right? I mean, that's really, the difference is they're really focused on a family audience. And that of course is a weakness, right? That, HBO Max can have, much more, adult focused. A show like Succession works really well on HBO Max.
Or Flight Attendant.
Right. And isn't a fit for Disney.
Or Gen X, Euphoria, all sorts of things that are a little bit more edgy.
Right.
Like HBO always has been edgy.
Right. And you can definitely see them sort of carve out their niche there. And again, reality actually fits, fairly well with that. And then the other two sort of elephants in the room, since you brought up elephants, are Apple.
Big product placement play there.
Right.
They have created a advertising channel for their products.
Exactly. Right. Apple's business goal is to sell more iPhones. And if you want, we've been enjoying the morning show, and there are like 80% of that show revolves around people talking on their cell phones, right?
And they have their MacBooks there, and they have like their displays. Everything is Apple.
Right. And they're, glamorous, and they're going to exotic locations, and, their lifestyle is enabled by this technology that they carry around in their pocket, essentially. So that is, sort of a weird niche in comparison to the others, but, makes total sense for Apple, particularly as a sort of defensive play, because they want to make sure that the content looks great on their devices. They don't want to have, Netflix do, Netflix decides that VR is the next big thing, right? And so they invest in VR, but Netflix doesn't have a VR device. Then, that obviously is a weakness for Apple, but they can say, okay, well, we're going to plan much better VR than Netflix can do, because we can make this, amazing VR headset that, will integrate with your iPhone and your MacBook and, all that stuff. Okay, so that's one of the elephants in the room, and then the other one is Amazon, which again is very interesting from a business perspective, because so number one, Amazon's business, and I'm sure a lot of people listening know this anyway, but it's kind of mind blowing. Their business is built off of web hosting. That's where they make all of their money. Is on actually, Netflix is, I think, their biggest customer.
Is on the cloud server.
Right. So Amazon's cloud services is, where all of their profit comes from. Retail is actually just kind of a hobby for them in terms of, revenue.
Is it really? Is it that much of a differential that the cloud service is really that much more of a driver than what's sold on Amazon Prime that I use pretty much every day?
I believe it or not, yes. I haven't checked in a couple of years, but the last time I looked at this, 100% of Amazon's revenue came from three things: their cloud services, their branded credit cards. Okay. So if you get an Amazon credit card to spend money on, Amazon, they make like 5% margin or whatever it is, right? So
good way to work it on both sides.
Right. Doesn't cost
buy
them
our
any
products
money.
And use our credit card, and you'll get a perceived discount, but not really.
Right. So that was number two, and then number three was unredeemed Amazon gift cards. Huh. If everybody listening redeemed their Amazon gift cards, Amazon would be in a heap of trouble, because that's where they make their money, is in, you give your aunt a $50 gift card for her birthday. She maybe spends half of it, she maybe just forgets about it completely, but Amazon already has the $50 and doesn't have to do anything more.
I bet Starbucks also would be in so much trouble if all of our listeners today just raced out there and spread the word and like, redeem your Starbucks, redeem your Starbucks. And that would be, you would see like stock falls, market crashes, all sorts of things happening out there.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think they have enough cash on hand to cover everybody doing it at the same time. But yeah, I mean, so, if you think about Amazon, their business in retail is, and it is profitable if you think about the gift card non-redemption and the credit cards, but that's really allows them to offer, rock bottom prices and, same day delivery and all of the things that has made them so much, whether it's good or bad, part of our everyday lives.
Sure.
So, when you then think about, well, why are they spending $1 billion on a Lord of the Rings TV show? It's kind of hard to answer that question. I think that really it is part of just a desire to be part of every transaction that somebody does, whether it's, buying something at retail or watching something online, on their cell phone, whatever it may be. If
Going
Amazon
on your
is
next space adventure as well.
Right. If Amazon is the gatekeeper, if they're the thing that you go through in order to get your entertainment or your your house supplies, whatever it is, that is more information that they have, that they see as valuable in order to they would say provide you with a better service, and and so on and so forth. But it does really call into question, other than the fact that they have $1 billion and Jeff Bezos likes Lord of the Rings, it does call into question why they're spending so much money on TV. And of course, acquiring MGM is their latest move.
Well, I believe that one of their, and although your theory may have just destroyed my theory, by the way, but I believe that Amazon is trying to bring in product placement advertising into their content because of some of their positioning of doing post-production digital and some of the conversations that they're having right now with brand marketers to replace products in scene and to value that based on a CPM and get brand advertiser dollars moved into Amazon in the near future.
Interesting. Okay.
This is for all you listeners. Here's the inside scoop of what Stacy knows in Hollywood and the conversations that go on out there, because this is happening right now.
Right. And that makes sense when you're selling. I mean, and Amazon, sells a pretty high proportion of, DVDs and books. And
everything.
So if you want your watch to be the thing that people are looking to buy on Amazon, then it makes total sense, right?
I think they're the best position. I know that you have other streamers from conversations we've had that are positioning themselves to offer in-show brands being featured and sold with an instant on-demand click-through ability to purchase. But Amazon's the best situated to actually pull this off.
So a sort of Apple-like strategy, but with everything
way wider, and they can replace anything. So any computer that would be in a scene could be swapped out in post-production for another brand with a CPM, and consumers, they're seeing the product placement, they're seeing the brand. To me and to most people, brands are actually providing a better story as well to the content, because it sucks watching something and you're holding a can of 6-pack and it says beer on its face, and it should actually say like Budweiser or Coors or something, because it takes you out of the scene. It takes you out of that sense of immersion and realism. And I know I'm a big advocate of product placement, so there's people who are out there going but psychological studies kind of back me up on this. But Amazon, with their content and their library with MGM and the amount of content they're producing, is opening themselves up to become a major advertising force that they're going to unleash, I have a feeling, in the very near future.
Fascinating. I
don't know what to say to that.
I don't know what to say to that. I don't know what products you can place in Lord of the Rings.
You can't, but you need people, right? You need content. Right. You need it to be a content destination that people want to come to. And then, you could say that then you're looking for the studio model of how do studios get their content seen by others without having to pay marketing dollars to do so. And a lot of times they'll partner with big advertisers to do co-branded promotions. And that's something Amazon certainly can do to bring in the eyeballs and rev share going back and forth there. They're not making hard dollars from that, but they are creating partnerships that are going to grow their visibility. So there's some natural partnerships, I think, there that are happening with their content.
Right. And these are things that, Apple is not very interested in promoting other people's products.
Just theirs.
Netflix, maybe.
Just theirs.
But
No.
mostly about, and Disney is, about promoting Star Wars and Marvel and Pixar.
Well,
right?
I think Disney is about promoting, like finding partners to promote theirs. Like they've had tremendous success, like creating massive co-branded promotional campaigns that allow them not to have a whole lot of below the marketing that they are having to do, because they have 30 different extensions of brands who are like blazing about this production that are coming out.
Right. Yes. So it's almost flipped around the Burger King meal for the
Burger King and Stranger Things, right? That was a good partnership that Netflix did.
Right.
And that brought a lot of awareness and eyeballs to Stranger Things at a time that they were trying to do so and to ramp up. And they were very selective about who they did a partnership with.
Right.
You're like, how are we talking about placement now? I was talking about numbers and impressions, but this is my world where I get fascinated in. So where do you think, like with the modeling that's out there, with some of the limited data, like Netflix is very, very limited. All of the streamers are very limited in what they'll actually share. And when you're working with studios, you can work with, other platforms that are part of the process that are outside the studio's whole world to, snag numbers from them. But do you see the streamers keeping the lid on all of this information as tightly as they have been?
Well, I think that there's quite a lot that we can glean from the streamers, and I will caveat this that I haven't looked at Netflix's new site, so I don't know, but they are they say they're bringing more and more data out. But even so, you can see some trends. So for example, with Disney, they have a daily trending top 25 shows. And basically every single day, The Simpsons is like one of their top 5, and often it's like number 2 title on Disney Plus. There's an Australian kids show called Bluey, which nobody had ever heard of before Disney. I had never heard of before Disney Plus started, I should say, but is now often the number 1 show on Disney Plus, because obviously kids are discovering it and love it, and and they want to watch it every day,
over and over and over and over and over and over and
exactly
over and over.
Exactly. So we can see that CoComelon's doing great on Netflix, often in the top 10 on Netflix. If you look on Netflix in the UK, Peppa Pig is often in the top 10 and is normally the number 1 kids show there. So you can begin to see the fact that The Simpsons is beating Black Widow and Shang-Chi on Disney Plus tells you something about where Disney Plus viewership is at. And so, now we've been doing this for a year or so, we can begin to kind of see, Netflix tends to have very sort of brief bursts of people getting very excited about a show. We Squid Game, exactly. And Tiger King, back, and then Bridgerton, and The Crown.
Stranger Things.
Right, Stranger Things. So these shows, they become kind of an obsession globally now. Squid Game, is globally a massive hit for Netflix, but for like 2 weeks, and then it'll kind of, disappear. And Netflix, tries to put the next thing out, that's going to be the big hit for them. Disney, is much more of a long game, and and as I say, if you look at their trending list, it's always The Simpsons, Frozen, Moana, the same movies that kids love to watch over and over again are the ones that just stick around on Disney Plus, and then they can bring out a new season of The Mandalorian, and that can be a little bit sort of behave a little bit more like a Netflix show that everyone's tuning in every week, and
get the parents at least engaged.
Right. And but I think that's a problem for Disney Plus, that they, with, that sort of very specific focus that they have on particular brands, that becomes a little bit exhausting. And speaking as a grown-up here, or one who plays one in business meetings, I'm kind of tired of Marvel TV shows. It's not that I don't enjoy them. It's just that, every week there's every couple of months there's a whole new one coming out that's, becoming, and I think there's a diminishing return for them on that approach.
It's not as special any longer.
Right. In the way, it took me a while to get into The Mandalorian, but I could see, it was a new thing that they were really doing with Star Wars. So, that I think is the risk for Disney. Whereas Netflix, I mean, who would have said, 3 months ago that, this Korean, like, horror,
psychological, like, it look inside, for anyone who hasn't watched, I mean, most of the people have to have watched, right? There's 900 million people who have watched Squid Game or something like that, or households, so even more than that. But like, it's a psychological, intriguing look at society and humanity, and it's so much more than just a show if you actually dial in and can get past the gore.
Right. I mean, and who would have thought that would be Netflix's big hit of the
I doubt they thought that.
Right. But these things can happen so quickly. I mean, I was talking to someone about TikTok yesterday, and on TikTok, things can become hits in like an hour. So we've got this complete sort of upending of the way things are thought about and I think Netflix is probably at the cutting edge of that. Disney is the sort of other extreme of very calculated, over the next 2 years, we're going to bring out all of these things in the Marvel universe. And, that's going to tell a new, strand of that story. HBO Max is sort of, between the two with, trying to build out a DC extended universe, but at the same time wanting to, just have, hits and, hit TV shows and so on.
Yeah, I think it's amazing what Netflix is doing that I think is really unique is they truly are doing the approach of the world is flat. They are the globalization of their content, the fact that they will do localized content that I'm willing to not listen to in some sort of translation, badly transcribed content, but where I'm actually willing to stop what I'm doing. And I'm like a constant worker. I'm always on my computer working away in the evening, but I'm willing to stop it, put it aside, and read captions in English in order to like see this content that is blowing up all over the world. And that's something that's very new to Americans because we are not big into closed captioning. We're not big into seeing, watching something that's in another language without being able to listen to it in English as well.
Right. And I think Netflix are beginning to kind of figure out their brand around that. One of the things, of course, I don't think I mentioned, but I grew up in England, and
no one could tell by your accent.
No,
sure.
I try to hide it, but so I watch shows that are set in England on Netflix. They're originals. Sex Education, for example,
which is awesome.
Awesome series. Great show, but I don't really recognize it as being English when I watch it. And it's deliberate and probably sensible from their perspective that they kind of want to trim off the edges. So you're not talking, just about a British school. You're talking about a school that could be really anywhere, but they sort of, speak with English accents, and they, maybe there's a little bit of, they talk about cups of tea, but it's not a British school that they're going to. It's a school that anybody anywhere in the world can recognize and sort of get the conflicts between the kids and the way that kids behave in school without being driven down the route of here's what the British educational system is like.
Well, even Elite, which takes place in Spain, it's the same way. Like it's very, very European, but American in many ways. It's just it's lacking of a distinct local feel and flavor.
Right. And and I think that speaks to the fact that Netflix is trying to get their content to be a potential hit anywhere in the world, with some exceptions, that maybe there are certain content isn't going to they're not even going to be able to broadcast in Saudi Arabia, or it's not going to be a fit for different countries.
There's always going to be some countries it's not going to be a fit for,
right? But they can at least say, well, this show, and the amount of money, I heard that I think they're spending $500 million next year on Korean content, because they've discovered that Korean content can play phenomenally well around the world, with of course Squid Game, but then also Parasite, the Snowpiercer, which was a movie, and then now a US TV show. Those kind of things that can come out of South Korea can be a hit anywhere, and and it makes perfect sense for them to say, well, okay, we'll trim off the edges a little bit so it's not so deeply embedded in South Korean culture that no one can understand what's going on outside of Korea, but that opens up the possibility of making it successful anywhere.
It'll be interesting to see if they decide to take a bend on like Squid Game, which is South Korea, but you could just as easily have a Squid Game version in Italy, or a Squid Game version in Canada, or anywhere, for what the context of the storyline is and how they have Americans, of course it's bad, us Americans, driving the storyline of being the funders for everything. Hopefully you've seen this by now and I haven't given away a secret.
Right. Well, I mean, we'll see, I guess. Whether they say, well, just why remake it? When everybody's watched the Korean version anyway, and we've learned that we can get this level of engagement without trying to make 6 different versions of this show.
It's fascinating. Well, Bruce, how can people find out more about the numbers and all of your resources and your subscriptions and all those good things if they're like me, who are like data friendly people who just hunger for numbers?
Well, so if you go to thenumbers.com, then you will find all of our box office tracking and our DVD sales and Blu-ray sales tracking. And we put up the Netflix Daily Top 10 there. So that's kind of our it's all free, and for consumer use. And then our data services are through Opus Data. So if you go to opusdata.com and sign up there, then we'll set you up with a trial subscription. That's mostly for people who are really in the big data world. So it's available via API, and we're expecting mostly to be working with people who are in the software world. And then if you go to the numbers and click on right now, it says our services. We're actually just updating the site, but we'll still have something which probably says very similar to that, where you can then get more information on our research services, which we do for individual projects and for individual clients. And email us and let us know what you need, and we'll see if we can help.
Well, Bruce, thank you so much for joining and shedding some more light on all things math and data and metrics and Hollywood. I really enjoyed myself.
This has been fun. Thank you, Stacey. I really enjoyed it. Thanks again for having me.
Of course. And to all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Marketing Mistakes and How to Avoid Them. We didn't really talk about mistakes today, but we did talk about the passion of film and content and what's happening out there. And it is a mistake if you miss the fact that numbers tell stories. So there's my mistake for you for the day. And until next week, I hope you have a good one. And if you have any questions about product placement and influencer marketing and how your brand can get and become part of the story itself, please reach out to my team and we'll be happy to connect and chat some more. Have a great one.